session, we're going to talk a little bit about the state and federal food policies that are in play and what you all can do to make sure that those policies are more are better for the people that we serve. So to begin with, wanted to sort of share a quote from candidate Trump when he was in Iowa, where he said, "We are going to end the war on the American farmer. Family farms are the backbone of America." He said that in Iowa, and he has rural America really came through for him, and we'll see a slide about that in a second. So just keep that in mind. The next slide is one of my favorite Virginia Woolf quotes. "The future is dark, which is the best thing the future can be," I think. And I think to me that means that the future is dark in the sense that it's unknowable, right? We don't know what the future brings. And despite it being murky and dark, we still are in control of the present, which will then shortly become the future. So this is what we know right now. And this is very broad framing about what's going on in DC. Commodity prices are continue to be very, very low. Farm expenditures continue to rise. Farm incomes are at the lowest point they've been in a decade. Extreme frustrations about regulations and trade. And rural counties played an unbelievably large role in the recent election. And so that creates some interesting policy dynamics in DC. And just to be very clear about how rural communities showed up for our president, this is the urban-rural split in the 2016 presidential vote. You can see blue are folks who voted for Hillary Clinton, red is folks who voted for Trump. The urban core came out 72%. 73% for the Democrat, whereas everywhere else came out in force for Donald Trump. That rural and very small city number is pretty shocking to me, right? 73%, 84% swing towards our president. But despite the unbelievable rural support, Trump didn't actually have an agricultural policy. He didn't have an agricultural platform. Rather, he had a humongously large ag advisory committee of 60-plus farm and ag business leaders that helped him understand sort of the farm issues and helped him give him talking points about farm issues. Some of these folks, one of the folks is this man named Sam Clovis, who's running the transition at USDA. Really smart guy. He really knows his agricultural policy. And this is important because USDA funds a lot of the programs that benefit the people who come through our food pantries. We'll talk about that a little bit in the presentation. Sonny Perdue is the Secretary of Agriculture. He recently breezed through his confirmation. It took them a ton of time to schedule his confirmation, but he breezed through the confirmation hearing last week. Not a lot of background in nutrition policy, and that one question he was asked about food stamps, he answered adequately. Right? He said that we need to ensure that there's good nutrition for our families and children. That was the only question that he was asked about nutrition policy. But now he's going to be running the USDA, which was founded in 1862 by Lincoln, who he called the People's Department, which I love, right? It's the People's Department because it's the department that is aimed at understanding how we grow more food, to procure, propagate, and distribute food for all, the United States Department of Agriculture. It has a $155 billion annual budget, about 100,000 employees, and about 250 political positions. It's a pretty humongous agency, and from what we know, the president seems to be interested in creating policies that would cut agencies, right? That would cut the budget, cut the staffing of agencies. So just something to keep in mind for now. So some of the political dynamics in DC. Congress wants to control spending. This is not a new tune. I'm sure you all have heard this for the last 8, 10, 15 years. What's interesting is that Trump wants to spend big on infrastructure. He proposed a $100 trillion, that's crazy, a $1 trillion infrastructure bill during the campaign, which was 4x bigger than Hillary Clinton's infrastructure bill. This could be potentially very good, right, for our country, building bridges, roads, that sort of thing. But Congress wants to control spending. Trump will be under unbelievable pressure to deliver for rural stakeholders because they really showed up for him. So that's really interesting, particularly since, remember in that first slide I was saying how on-farm income has been at the lowest point it's been in over a decade. And then after the healthcare loss last week, there will be significant pressure for budget cuts and wins, right? Because they were able to cut they were able to, in the healthcare bill that they proposed, they created some tax savings for folks while changing the way healthcare would have been delivered. But now that that's gone, they don't have the baseline, right, to create more tax savings for people during health reform. So because that didn't happen, a lot of the plans for what they want to do with policy going forward have sort of changed. And now the administration and Congress is going to be under unbelievable pressure to be able to deliver something. So what's at stake for us in the current federal process? First is the annual appropriations process. So every year, the president will give a budget outline and say, these are my priorities. This is what the country should be spending money on. And this is what this was the question that the lady at the opening session asked about. What about the cuts that the president proposed? In his skinny budget, which basically covered all non-mandatory spending, so discretionary spending, he basically cut a lot of programs, proposed that a lot of the community block grant services, the community block grant program got cut, like a ton of things got zeroed out. WIC was left intact, which is interesting, which is great given the importance of WIC to local communities, to pregnant moms and postpartum moms and kids. But again, it's just the starting point, right? He gives this budget outline to Congress. Congress then appropriates what they want to do, which sometimes has nothing to do with the president's budget, sometimes it does. And then they pass the budget through the normal appropriations process. This has not happened, interestingly, for the last few years. Our government has functioned on this thing called continuing resolutions, which means that they haven't passed the budget, they've just extended the previous budget in a flat way because they can't figure out how to appropriate in a normal budget process given how things are stacked up in DC. What's interesting is that in April, we're going to hit the debt ceiling again. So the government might shut down because we might run out of money because in the last continuing resolution, there was enough money appropriated to get us to about April 22nd or so without taking out, printing more money, taking out more loans. This is going to be interesting. The thought was that they would pass healthcare reform, they would do something about taxes, and then would have some money to figure out how they're going to avert the debt ceiling. Right now, it's anybody's guess. In fact, today's USA Today headline is, Congress races to avert shutdown. Lawmakers work to have spending bill ready days before funding expires next month. So that's looming. At the same time, there's healthcare reform, right? We all saw what was happening last week. This has created some interesting new dynamics in that I think our legislators are understanding that if they're going to get anything done, they can't do it all on one side. They have to engage their friends on the other side of the aisle because there are these funny internecine battles on the Republican side as to what healthcare reform should mean. This could be an opportunity for improving healthcare. I think if we're going to hold Trump to his words from the campaign where he said everybody should have access to high quality healthcare, that seems to be something that we should be rattling the cages about, given that, as I think we all know, that healthcare is a humongous expense for the folks who are coming through our food pantries. Tax reform. This is something that has been underreported so far, but the charitable deduction for taxes for charitable donations, the deduction for charitable donations might be on the table as something they would get rid of to close some loopholes in tax reform. That would have existential changes to how you all raise money and how we raise money, right? If people don't get the deduction on large donations, it might change how they donate. It might create different incentives for them. The other thing that's on the table is potentially the mortgage interest deduction, which is something that we all homeowners benefit from. Whether it's on the second house or the first house is up for debate, but that's also in the package that people are discussing. And the final is immigration reform, because the folks who pick and pack our food are largely immigrants, largely Latino, and many of them are not here legally, right? Are undocumented. And so, if anything were to happen with immigration reform, building the wall, kicking people out, that might actually raise food prices, which then has a downward effect on the folks who are coming through your doors, and also your ability to source food, and our ability to source food as well. So those are the sort of large 50,000-foot level things happening. But then there are also like actual bills that are moving and not moving. Child nutrition reauthorization. Who's been following this over the last 3 years and plus? It basically authorizes funding for school meals, school breakfast, WIC, summer meals, a whole host of important nutrition programs. It expired 2 years ago, and is now, because Congress couldn't pass a child nutrition reauthorization bill, it's just continuing at its previous funding level. No changes, which in some ways could be a good thing, right? Because you don't want them monkeying around with it too much, especially with the current policy dynamics in DC. I put question marks there because it, at some point, needs to get reauthorized, right? It is now just operating sort of like a zombie, right? And that's not good, particularly given that we have some real opportunities to improve how we deliver meals during the summer, during the weekend, that the current bill doesn't address. But the big thing is the Farm Bill. And why is the Farm Bill important? The Farm Bill is important because it funds the food stamps program, and a bunch of other programs, TFAP, the commodity programs, and also some of the local food coordination programs. But the big ticket item is the Farm Bill. I'm sorry, is the food stamp program in the Farm Bill. This is an old slide, but just a quick show of hands. Who thinks, what percentage of food stamp spending is in the Farm Bill? Does anybody know?
100%.
100%? Close. It's 80%. Nutrition spending in the Farm Bill is 80% of total Farm Bill spending. Right? And remember when I was saying that on-farm income was at its 10-year low? Crop insurance is probably going to run out of funding soon, before farmers can get their seeds in the ground. So when you think about delivering a big farm bill for the rural folks who really helped the president get elected, and you can't look anywhere else for money because you're not going to raise taxes, you're not going to, you're not going to find dollars anywhere else. You have to find it within the farm bill jurisdiction. If you're going to increase the funding for crop insurance and other programs, where are you going to go look in that pie? You can go look at the biggest slice of the pie, which is the 80%, right? So this to us is troubling, right? Because 42 million Americans still are on the food stamps program. It still helps 700,000 people here in our state. And yet, the benefit is probably still a little too low. So this is how they're going to try to deal with the funding issue. They're going to try to cut the program, but they're not going to cut the program in ways that are recognizable, right? They're going to talk about flexibility. How do we achieve flexibility in the administration of the food stamps program to give local communities more freedom to choose how they implement it? And basically, when you hear anybody say that, that means they're going to block grant the program. Has anybody heard of a block grant? This is why it's bad, for those of you who haven't heard about it, or haven't heard, don't know what it is. A block grant, basically, right now, the food stamps program functions like this. If you're qualified for the benefit, which means if you make less than $20,000 a year, if you're a family of 3, whatever it is, you get the benefit. You apply, you get the benefit, you're eligible, you get the benefit. A block grant would basically, and the reason why the program functions that way is that when times are bad and a lot of people become eligible, there's funding to catch all the folks who are eligible and give them a basic level of assistance, right? When times are good and they graduate out of the program, then there's no need for the program they're just out of the program, and so the program sort of shrinks, right? It's elastic in that way. What a block grant does is that it severs that guarantee, right? It basically says, here, Wisconsin, here's $1 billion for you to deal with your nutrition problems in whatever way you want, and you can do anything you want, so long as you deal with nutrition. It caps the funding at $1 billion, or whatever the state has spent over the last 12 months, and says, you deal with it. You can do whatever you want. And when a state hears that, they say, that's amazing. I could potentially build roads because I can make an argument that for someone to get to the supermarket to spend their food stamp dollars, they need good roads, right? That's not what food stamp dollars are meant for, right? And food stamp dollars are meant for you to go to the store to buy food. The block grant could then states could further restrict the amount of funding by implementing different eligibility restrictions, time limits, participation barriers, reductions in outreach, and other ways to just like preserve the limited amount of funding they have for assistance by keeping people out of the program, right? And that's not how we want to structure our nutrition programs. We want to ensure that anybody who's eligible has access to those programs because, you know, what's more basic than being able to afford just a really minimum amount of food? So you all must beware of politicians bearing block grants. It fundamentally changes the way how these programs are structured, and again, like I said, it severs that fundamental guarantee that folks who are struggling have access to a very basic level of assistance. And so the thing we always hear is that, well, if we cut the food stamps program, or if we cut nutrition assistance, charity, all of you amazing people are just going to step into the breach and fill the gap, right? So this is just a little bit of an example of scale. Just talk a little bit about the difference in scale. All of charitable food assistance in the United States, so every pound of food that comes through a food bank or a food pantry, valued at about $5 billion. A lot of money, a ton of, like tons and tons and tons of food. It's really amazing. The food stamps benefit costs our nation $70 billion a year. So for you guys not having to do the math, that is 14 times the size of the entire charitable food network. 14 times the size. In Wisconsin, we on average spend about $1 billion on food stamps. It's a little less now because participation is decreasing. It's around 800 million. All of charitable food in Wisconsin is about $120 million worth. It's about a tenth the size of the food stamps program. So if you could countenance a 10% cut to the food stamps program in Wisconsin, that would wipe out every last pound of food you all have distributed over the last year. Every last ounce, right? Because people don't have the resources to go out and purchase that amount of food on their own. So no, charity cannot fill the gap, and you'll probably hear me say this again. at a certain point, some of your elected officials may come to you and sing the siren song of block grants, right? They will say, look, if we block grant the food stamps program, you'll be able to have maybe $5,000 to buy a new truck or to buy a new refrigerator. Wouldn't that be great for you? And you must reject those calls, because it is not worth this, right? That $5,000 truck or that $5,000 refrigerator isn't going to get you to be able to fill in the gap of what a cut of this scale would mean to the emergency food network. Some state proposals. So it's not just the feds. The states our state is getting into it too. In the governor's budget, he is proposing to implement an 80-hour month work requirement for families with children. You may have heard last or 2 years ago they implemented an 80-hour a month work requirement for single adults without children. They are planning to extend that to families with children. You know, I can't say this enough that a good job is the best anti-hunger tool available to us. But if the jobs are located in places where people can get to, or they don't have the transportation or the childcare to be able to access those jobs, it's, you know, it can be very difficult to implement it can be tough to implement a one-size-fits-all work requirement and expect people to just be able to participate in it. Our governor has also written a letter to the president asking him to allow for drug testing for food share. Currently, drug testing for food share is illegal. You can't do it, but given the new administration and the new administration at USDA, that could possibly be a thing. Drug testing, clearly, you know, drug addiction is a very serious problem, and we should ensure that people who are dealing with this public health crisis have the access to treatment and diversion programs. But it doesn't seem right to screen for drugs as a condition for food, particularly since people who are poor don't utilize drugs at a higher rate than the general public. And in every instance where they have drug tested for welfare benefits, it has come out to be an unbelievably expensive boondoggle where just one or two people get caught up in it. And the last thing in the budget proposal is that they would re-implement an asset test of about $20,000. So we are opposed to this because it feels like we should be incentivizing people to save. That seems like a way out of poverty as opposed to penalizing them for saving. It feels backwards to us, and particularly since most food share recipients have only about $300 in savings, you're just adding an additional barrier for somebody to prove something that they clearly already don't have. Particularly if the standard is so high, $20,000. And like, you know, if I lost my job, or anybody with savings lost their job, it seems like a foolish thing to ask them to liquidate a 401k in order for them to pay for groceries. It just doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. There are some bills out there. There's a bill that would require people to be current on their child support in order to receive food share. This is one of those touchy subjects, right? Because there's sometimes families are not up to date on their child support because they don't want to know where, they don't want the husband or the boyfriend to know where they are. There's some domestic violence issues. And I think the problem too is that many of the folks who are behind on their child support aren't deadbeats, they're just broke, you know? And so to further penalize them seems to not be, I understand the intent of the bill, but it feels like there are other things that could actually help people get current on their child support and also get their food share. And there are a bunch of anti-fraud bills that would incentivize counties to seek out fraud. And while I think we can all agree that fraud is terrible, any ounce of fraud in the system degrades public trust in the system, studies have shown when you go to seek out fraud, you end up kicking out people out of the program that are just trying to play by the rules, because the focus on anti-fraud measures becomes so intense. There's a potential that we may, I don't know how many of you were up to date on the Harvest for Hope legislation last year that would have increased the amount of fresh, healthy food in the emergency food system by about 10 million pounds. We are figuring out how we may be able to make another run at that bill this year, which would be a slightly positive thing in what is a landscape of a lot of dreariness out there. So be on the lookout for that.
And that's a state proposal?
Yeah, yes. We haven't introduced it yet, but our legislative sponsors are very interested in making another run at it. So be on the lookout for that. We will definitely be asking for your support. Yes.
David, maybe you just want to share just a little bit.
Oh, sure.
And also share that there are other states that are doing that.
Yeah. So what Harvest for Hope would do is that it would be a public-private match between the state and the state's food banks, where for every dollar we raise, the state would give $1, basically up to $250,000, so a total kitty of about $500,000. And what that would fund would be grade A fresh processed food from a local processor in our state. So so they would go about their business in processing Wisconsin-grown carrots, green beans, corn, those sorts of products in a low sodium format, and we would just buy a small percentage of their run. So coming out of their processing plant, a truck would go out to Pick and Save, and a couple of trucks would come to us, and it's totally invisible in the food system, which is super exciting, right? Because it doesn't require anybody to do any more work, and we would be able to get this product on pennies on the dollar, right? Basically the cost of the can and the label, because of the generosity of the processor and the farmers. The other thing that this grant would do would be to help us incentivize farmers to donate fresh produce. So if you have a local farmer in your area and they donate a bin of carrots, you would invoice us. We would cut the farmer a check once the amount got up to $100. We would basically establish a going price for carrots. We wouldn't touch any of the food. Food would come to you. You invoice us. We pay the farmer, which is super exciting because the cost for donation is a thing, right? I mean, donating isn't exactly free, particularly when you're talking about donating at scale. So those are the two things that Harvest for Hope would do. We expect that it could generate at least 10 million pounds of fresh food in a year in the state, and also I think create more of an awareness of the ability to donate fresh produce around the state, which we believe will sort of generate more interest in it. Yes?
Is there any part of that might work with processing companies to take the hundreds of acres that they leave unpicked every year to produce?
So that's what the first part of that program would do. It would basically work with the processor to buy into their pack plan. So they would harvest more than they normally would harvest. The challenge with working with processors at scale is that, you know, when a processor makes its plan for a run, they're running 6 months out of the year, 24 hours a day, and so we have to sort of fit into their plan. They can't fit into ours, right? Because it costs them millions of dollars to shut down their run and then start it up again just for us, right? So we basically have to be a part of the system as it is currently structured. If you're talking about engaging with a processor at the industrial level, there are plenty of production kitchens and small-scale processors that I think we could partner with. But as I mentioned in my beginning talk, the cost is pretty high.
Back to the previous.
Yep.
Okay, they're talking about doing all this drug testing, asset test, anti-fraud in order to cut down on the food share expense that they're giving out in the state,
Yep.
correct? Did they make a comparison of what all that's gonna cost the state in order to do all that? I mean,
Yeah.
it would almost level it out, wouldn't it?
Well, it would actually cost the state money because food share dollars are not funded by the state. They are federal dollars coming into these are our tax dollars coming back into the state from DC. So it would actually cost the state money to do all of this stuff with.
It's all on principle, right? And the other thing is child support. I mean, if everyone who has several young children knows years 1 through 5 are very expensive childcare, and then how are we going to pay for that when that mom goes back full-time instead of maybe working part-time? Or
If this is federal money coming in, then why is the state opposing to it?
they,
The political answer is that they don't believe that the state should be dependent on federal dollars coming back into the state. And so they want to ensure that, that the state can stand on its own and do all of its own, and be independent, right? They don't want to be under the thumbs of DC. That's the political answer. The non-political answer is that they have some feelings about who's getting benefits in our state, and they don't want to get benefits.
So those
That's kind
federal
of
dollars would go someplace else if they weren't coming to Wisconsin? They would go into another program?
They would not go into another program. The food stamps dollars are just dollars that are at the state that are at the feds that, you know, if it's spent, it's spent. If it's not, it's not. We certainly want to maximize the amount of food share dollars coming into our state and all federal dollars coming into our state, because these are our tax dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've already paid them. We should at least, you know, get them back when times are bad.
Okay, I can see that, being that we had this is becoming political. Being that we had a Democratic president with a Republican governor, but now that we have a match, why wouldn't the governor take those dollars, being that they are available now from the federal government?
Because I think the feeling is that any amount of taxation that gets redistributed to people who may or may not pay taxes is a waste of our tax dollars. Even though they're already gone, right? Even though those dollars are already gone.
They've already been taken.
They've already been taken, right? So, I mean, that's. I share your frustration. It doesn't make any sense to me. And this is not a partisan issue, right? I mean, I would say that President Bush did some unbelievable things, did some really amazing things for the food stamps program. I think they understood that, you know, every dollar that goes into a local community gets spent at your local grocery store. And that is stimulative for business. You may not want to depend on federal dollars to stimulate your business, but when things are bad and nobody is spending any money, that is not the worst thing to keep a local business open. So this is a new thing, and new as in over the last few years. So so it's interesting, and does sort of change some of the dynamics that we have to work with. And just one final thought about immigration reform. I said this earlier. Undocumented immigrants milk over half our cows in America, a huge percentage in Wisconsin. They pick 75% of our fruits and vegetables. They work high-risk, low-pay jobs with no social safety net. And if we're going to deport them or make it harder for them to work, our agriculture industry is going to suffer quite a bit, and food prices will go up.
Then it's already started.
Yep. So immigration does have a real effect on the work that you do. And I'll also note that the folks who are picking our food are oftentimes the most food insecure, right? Because they work these high-risk, low-paying jobs, which is crazy, right? That the folks who are making our food system work are the ones who can't participate in it. And the other thing too, with all this talk about immigration and public charge and things like that, this is anecdotal right now, but I would be curious to learn from you all if you see a dip in folks who are Latino or otherwise have unclear immigration status showing up at your food pantries. We have heard across the state that that is true, that there has been a downturn, and that's going to be something that we have to figure out how to address, how to make people feel safe in our pantries throughout our communities. So just really quickly, I want to have time for some discussion. Some things to expect. There are going to be some attempts to change the nutrition program because of the inability to pass healthcare. Nutrition is another big number that is considered a welfare program that folks who may be deserving, may not be deserving, are receiving, and so there might be some efforts to try to address that. Tax reform may affect your ability to raise funds, depending on what they include in the reform and how that reform gets played out. As we talked about, immigration reform may raise food prices, and then potentially there might be some small investments in local food in the Farm Bill. We're hearing that in the Farm Bill that there's some excitement about reducing food waste and maybe doing some small local food projects. But those are really small scale things, right? Not at the B scale, a billion, but more at the M scale, a million. So very different. What does this mean for you? Your voice counts. There are a lot of folks who represent this sort of area that have some play in DC. Rep. Duffy was an early Trump supporter. He was never a never Trumper, so he, I think, has some play with the administration. He's also interested in the issue. He hosts a hunger and homelessness forum every year in the Wausau area, which has been attended by our food banks, maybe some of you, and so he's clearly interested in the issue. Representative Ron Kine is going to be a player on tax reform. Senator Baldwin sits on the Agricultural Appropriations Committee. They're the committee that basically writes the funding for our ag programs, which is exciting. Senator Harsdorf is on the Agriculture Committee and also the Joint Finance Committee at the state, which is two really, really important committees, right? The Ag Committee, because they would be the committee that starts our Harvest for Hope bill, and the Finance Committee because they have to pass anything that has a fiscal note to it. And then Senator Moulton is the Ag Chair. So you have some folks who have a real role to play that represent you. So I would suggest, if you haven't already, it would be good to reach out and just say hi and tell them about the work that you do and why it's important. People are always shocked when I say this, that all it takes for a legislator to feel like there's a lot of interest in an issue at the state capitol, even at the U.S. Capitol, about 5 calls. 5 calls will swing an issue. 5 calls will get somebody's attention. So if you can get someone to call someone, if you can get 5 of your friends to call Senator Harsdorf, it's a big deal about hunger. Or if you get 5 of your friends to write her a letter about the work that you do and why it's important, it becomes a big deal. The level for entry on advocacy and making your voice count is really, really low. And in some ways, that's good, right? Because it really empowers you, right? In some ways, I think we want more people to be more engaged more often, such that 5 calls is not the thing that would tip folks on an issue. For those of you who are in the storytelling session, your client stories will change hearts and minds. Facts won't do it, unfortunately. We've been trying to, if we were able to change people's minds on facts, we would have won this issue years ago. The facts are on our side. However, they just don't matter. And the thing that matters, though, are the lives that you guys are touching and the lives that you all are changing. And being able to raise up those stories to your elected officials and to the local media and to your friends and neighbors is the thing that's going to change people's hearts and minds about this issue. And I said it before, you must reject all calls for block grants. at some point, it may not be this year, it may be next year, but someone is gonna come calling to get your support on why this will be a great idea for you. You have to say no, because it would fundamentally change the way these programs are structured in a negative in a negative way. So one last thing, sign up for our newsletter. Go to our website at www.feedingwi.org. You can drop in your email and then get our newsletter, which is usually monthly. It's unfortunately sort of shifted to more quarterly as work has become a little bit more crazy for me since I'm the one who writes the newsletter. But you'll get updated on all the things that are cooking in DC and at the state level. And you'll have a lot of great information about all of this stuff that we talked about. So with that, I would love to, in the time remaining, if you have any questions, discussion, I'm totally open to giving political or non-political answers to